how many deltas should I use? If you have a 30 delta strangle in SPY, how many short deltas should you hedge against that in order to reduce your outlier risk? Is it 1, 5,
Interesting.
10, 50?
How many short deltas should you use to hedge your outlier risk? The rule of thumb is always under hedge. Give me the example. What are we hedging? Tell me what we're hedging. I'll tell you how many deltas to use.
All right, well, let's take a look. Whenever we sell premium, the biggest risk we face is volatility expansion. The issue is that volatility expansion in equities are always accompanied with large down moves in the underlying. So based on this, how can we hedge away some of this downside risk? We're going to use SPY for this example. And the question is exactly what we're asking. How many short deltas does it take to offset outlier risk of one short 30 delta SPY strangle? And the example we're going to use here is 2020. It doesn't really matter what example because it works out the same way.
Yeah, but you see, it's a tough question because most people would not hedge a 16 delta strangle because there's no deltas there.
It's 30.
You just said it's a 16 delta strangle, right?
It's 30. It's a 30 deltas. This study is going to use 30 delta strangles for the.
Doesn't matter what delta you use. If you're using a strangle and they're both 30 deltas, your delta is 0, whatever you're doing. So the question becomes, based on our research, how many deltas would you need? And our research in the past, I'll just tell you what we've told people for a long time, and let's see if this is consistent with it, because I have not seen this study yet. But what we've told people is on the low side, per $100,000, 100 SPY deltas, which would be the equivalent of, let's say that's 55,000 notional, but 100 SPY deltas on a $100,000 account, that's on the low side. On the high side, 200 to 300. So it could be anywhere between 100 and 300. In bull markets, you want to be closer to 100 to 200, in bear markets closer to 200 to 300. So I'm going to say from a notional side, you don't want to be over the notional amount. So if you have a $100,000 account, 200 would be right around the notional equivalent to hedge the whole notional risk of the position. So I'm going to say your answer is going to be a minimum of 100 SPY deltas, and it could go as high as 300, but it should be around a max of 200. That's my guess.
That's pretty good. I gotta give that to you. That's pretty good.
That's what our research in the past has shown. And that's what we've been telling people when they ask that question to us. That's our mechanics for the last, 10 years or so.
I like where you got that because that was also my research. But so yes, this will be aligning very closely to that because it comes from the same place. But I do appreciate that you quoted that. So I remember we did it a little bit of a different way in the past. The way we're going to look at it now is specifically looking at outlier risk. In the past, we looked at how you hedge your risk off to or how your overall daily risk is reduced. And I thought about that and I was like, okay, well, that's not bad. But realistically, people don't care about hedging with short deltas unless there's a move like we had early August, right? Because that's really why you hedge. You don't really hedge when markets are two-sided a little bit. Like nobody cares about that. It's really when you have those huge capitulations that you're like, oh, it's a good thing I hedged. Otherwise, I would have been in the. So that's where we're going to look at outlier loss specifically. But the actual deltas does come out to the same if you expand it out to the portfolio level. But instead of doing it that way, we're going to do it on a single contract basis just to make it a little bit more tangible.
Okay.
Especially people who are starting out. We're going to look at 2017. The president sold one SPY 30 delta strangle, 45 days. We rolled it 21 days, and we did this consistently. We compared the average win rate, largest loss, and average P&L, and we reran the study with the following short SPY deltas that are added to each of these. It's added to the trade. This is 5, 10, 20, and 30. So this is per 30 delta strangle, which right now 30 delta strangle runs you about what, $6,000, $7,000 in buying power, and was last back in 2017. So an average of $5,000 to $6,000. Right. That in mind, that's where you can expand it to the portfolio level. So there are 3 key trade-offs when adding these short delta. And obviously they're changing the metrics that we are looking to offset, right? So if we go from 0 to 30 per strangle, so 0 short deltas to 30 short deltas per strangle, you reduced your win rate by 10%, your worst loss by 39%, and your average P&L by 84%. So that was basically taking from the minimum to basically the maximum and seeing where you could end up in between. Realistically, if you want a really conservative portfolio, you could do this. You won't make as much money nearly at all. Your worst loss is basically cut in half. We don't want to go, like you said, overhedged. Realistically, the first 2 places where you can start is maybe 5, 10, even 20 if you want to be super aggressive. Basically, when you get above 30, that's where you start to get overhedged. Okay. Because that's where your average P&L basically goes to near zero.
Okay, that makes sense. After that. Okay.
So there's no correct amount of short deltas to have on, but we know that the market tends to move higher. So because of that, we want to start with either 5 or 10. That allows your portfolio to experience a tangible risk reduction, which in this case, if you were going through 2020, which is the worst loss over the study period, you go from a worst loss of 5,200 per contract down to roughly 47 on average if you take between 5 and 10 short deltas. So you're reducing about 10% of your risk. In the meanwhile, your average P&L stays pretty high. You give up a little bit because you have positive drift over the time period, and your win rate basically stays around 70% as well. If you're doing per single strangle, shoot between 5 to 10% to start and see how that works, and then you can adjust over time.
5 and 10% is.
I'm sorry, 5 to 10 deltas. 5 to 10 deltas. If you're going to use your example where you have a $100,000 account and you're allocating, let's say, 50,000 to positions, right? 50,000 buying power. Let's just do the math backward to see where it gets back to the portfolio level. If it was an average of $5,000 per buying power for each 30 delta strangle, you do 10 of them, it gets to 100, right? For the portfolio level, the minimum. That's where the 10 per position comes from.
10 deltas per one lot of a strangle.
Yep.
Let me just think about this. How does that play out to
100?
I guess that's the same thing. That's 100. If you use $10,000 per trade, that would give you the equivalent. Yeah, it's the same thing as 100 deltas.
It would be roughly 5,000 per trade over this study period. That would get you to the minimum.
Okay,
right?
I got it.
You go up to 50%.
I got it. You're doing it a little weird, but yeah, I got it.
I'm doing it a little backwards specifically to do it on a trade by trade basis, so I can show you specifically how much the outlier loss is reduced.
Yes, I understand.
And in this case, you get about 10% off of your an outlier loss, which realistically in a period where your buying power is tied up, that 10% is quite a bit, and that could realistically allow you to roll a position that you couldn't roll before. It could allow you to have some extra cash in your portfolio that you wouldn't have otherwise had. Even though it seems small on a huge move, it turns out to be quite significant, and that's why we do it.
Good. That's good study.
So when considering to add a hedge to your short premium portfolio, remember that you're carrying too much delta can eat away at your P&L and win rates. That's because markets do go up over time. And for traders considering adding some short deltas to a short premium portfolio, starting between 5 to 10 short deltas per short strangle in SPY, remember this is all done in the context of SPY, can reduce the impact of a tail event by roughly 10% while maintaining the win rate and P&L. I wanted to add this especially to this study because when we talk about outlier loss, I always get people asking, how can you be sure like these are, because outlier loss, mine was worse or mine wasn't this bad. I always say this study should be more guidelines and never guarantees. Always trade small and integrate new strategies slowly because when it comes to outlier losses, it's very unpredictable by nature. So even in a study scenario, you have to be careful of how you present it because it's a very loose guideline as opposed to a hard, fast rule.
Got it.
I guess for new traders, it's against human nature. Tom and I will do it immediately, if not sooner, the way I always say it, because you got to keep your deltas in line. Delta is what hurts the position.
The hardest thing for a new trader who's coming into the option space to do is actually this, because by nature, if you're new, you tend to want to be long more than short, right? Because that's how most people were brought up. So that's why I even say, don't go all the way to 10 or 20 short deltas or even 10. Start with 5. Get acclimated and just see how it works for you. Then you can scale on as you want appropriately.